MPs are paid £91,000 a year. Is that okay? Is that too much? Is it not enough? Is it reasonable? Let's get into it. Let's start off with the fact that they don't just get paid 91,000. They're about to have a pay rise of 2.8%, which is going to take them up to £94,000 a year. It's a lot. You hear people talking about all the expenses they get and all that. Listen, people are cross about it. So we're going to strip it all back. We're going to have a look at what they get paid. We're going to talk about why they get paid it. And spoiler, I think it's quite reasonable how much they get paid. Let me show you why. First of all, we need to understand that MPs do not vote themselves a pay rise. You see this all over social media, and it's just nonsense. Pay decisions have been taken out of their hands and into the hands of a group called IPSA, the Independent Parliament something. What they do, IPSA decides how much they should earn, and it goes up in line with public sector workers. So if teachers get a pay rise, MPs get a pay rise. If emergency services do have a pay rise at the moment, so that's partly why MPs are getting a pay rise. This happened because MPs were not voting for themselves to have a pay rise. There was increasing pressure on them not to vote, and so MPs were comparatively getting pay cuts every year. So they introduced IPSA, and they decide, and MPs just have to accept it. It just goes into their bank account. Now, some MPs do put any pay rises aside and give them to charities in their constituency. I've known MPs do that. You don't have to spend it all on, caviar and champagne if you want. But why are they paid so much? Right? 91,000 or 94,000. It sounds like an awful lot, and it is, but it's less than, CEOs, it's less than secondary school head teachers, it's less than GPs, they get paid more, it's less than pilots, air traffic controllers. I have no idea air traffic controllers got paid so much, but I guess you want good air traffic controllers. And you know what air traffic controllers do is they control the sky and they make sure planes don't crash. You want good people, you pay them decent money. MPs kind of do that too, maybe less with the sky, but more with our lives, maybe. If anyone in those professions wanted to become an MP, they would take a pay cut to do so. They would be paid less than they would in the open market. So if you cut that, then you make more people take a pay cut if they want to be an MP. It stops people from wanting to be an MP. And we want the best people in our country to be running this country by being in Parliament, by being members of Parliament. We want the best. And that's what we have to do to pay for it. And some people say, no, that's complete nonsense. And I can understand that argument. They're complete nonsense. We should link their pay to the national minimum wage so they know exactly what it's like. They know exactly what it's like to be on that breadline, to struggle. Well, there's two issues with that. One is, how do you measure how long an MP works? So if it's on minimum wage, you get paid per hour rather than an annual salary. But MPs work extraordinary long hours, 60, 70 hours a week, because it's not just when they're in Parliament, when they're in a constituency, when they're going to what you might think of as drinks, but they're actually working because they're representing your area or they're representing their department. It's work. So do you pay people 70 hours? Do MPs have to clock in and clock out like factory workers? I don't know how that would work. But more importantly, if you get paid more by not being an MP, the only people who are going to be MPs are rich people who don't really care about the salary. You don't want MPs to only be rich people. If only people who went to Eton were in the Commons, you would be cross about it. Being an MP is a valuable thing to society. And I think that society should reward them financially for doing it. You've also got no job security. In 5 years' time, you might get booted out. And the idea, in theory, you get booted out if you've done a bad job. But the reality is, if your party, let's say I'm a good Conservative MP, and then going to the last election, carnage for Conservative MPs, I could do an amazing job. I'm still being kicked out because all the Conservative MPs are being kicked out. It's a tough gig. Expenses. This is the bit that's really quite controversial, and I know why it's controversial. I think 2010, the Telegraph got hold of loads of documents and exposed some of the awful things that were happening with MPs' expenses. Now, we're 15 years later, everything has changed. MPs, when they're elected, they suddenly need a lot of help. They have a parliamentary office where they deal with all the parliament things, and then they've got a constituency office living where they normally live, and they need to have people in both. It's far too much work. They couldn't possibly do it on their own. So they've got people in both. They're given like an allowance for office costs, for setting up, for computers and for paper clips, all that kind of stuff. They're given about 30 grand to spend on that. None of that money goes to them. That 30 grand, they have to send via IPSA, them again, and then that money goes directly to the suppliers. In fact, in the year 2023 to 24, only 8 MPs out of 650 8 MPs spent all of that 30 grand. That's because they're not in it for themselves. They're just using the money they need to do their job effectively. And then you got staff. Now, staff do cost a bit of money, but that's because you need good people. And you are given, right? You're given about 236 grand. 236 grand to spend how you want on staff. Now, this money goes through payroll, and payroll is done by IPSA. The MP is not given a penny of that money. But you know what? Only 6 MPs used up all of their staff money because they take what they need, and they leave the rest. This is not a corrupt system. This is a system that allows MPs to do their jobs. And then there's a bit on transport and a bit on food. And the people who claim the most on that are the ones that live furthest away. If you're an MP of the Outer Hebrides, your transport to London every single week, it's not going to be cheap, is it? If you're an MP in Northern Ireland, you have a sea between you and Parliament. It's expensive to get to and from. So they bill Parliament quite a lot of money for it. But 400 MPs, so that's way over half the MPs, claim less than £10,000 for transport and food, even though they move around a lot. Again, they need to demonstrate to IPSA what they have spent the money on in order to get it back. This is not a way to make lots of money. And then there's an extras column. 550 MPs didn't claim a single extra. Not one. We've seen they don't use all the money they could, and they don't claim things they could, which really suggests that they're using the expenses system the way it's been designed to be used, the way you would want it to be used. That money is there to help them do a good job. And yes, it costs a bit of money. I mean, around about £300,000 per MP per year, but they are the members of Parliament representing each area in Parliament, and I think that's reasonable to do. Housing. This is a whole nother deal. You're an MP, you need to have a house in, your Welsh constituency and a house near Parliament, because you need to represent your people in Parliament and you need to speak to your people not in Parliament. Parliamentary votes on a Monday, in particular Mondays, they don't sit till 2:30 so that people can get from their constituencies into Parliament, and then they sit until like 10:30, and there could be votes that late. And if there's parliamentary votes coming up, they cannot leave Westminster. They can't do it because they need to be there to vote. Voting for an MP is the biggest way they can represent their constituency and their party, and they have to be there to do it. So they can't leave until 10:30. They can't leave till 11 o'clock. They can't leave Parliament. And then, there might be some last trains in some areas, but they need somewhere to live. And on Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday, they don't tend to sit so late, but MPs work all the time. They're in meetings in London. They're having drinks receptions, and that's not just about the nibbles. MPs need to meet people. They need to talk to people. They need to understand where people are coming from. They need to really get into the arguments. So they need somewhere in London. They normally have their home in the constituency and then rent somewhere in London because they tend to be from their constituency already. They keep that house. Now, you get £27,000 to rent somewhere. If you've got like a partner and children, you get a little bit more because you obviously need a bigger property. With that money, you can rent. I was having a little look at what's available in the city of Westminster. For under £2,000, you're really struggling to find anything. I mean, this is some of the most expensive places in the country to rent. And you also need to kit out your home. Maybe it comes furnished, but you've got to pay all your bills, your council tax, your internet. You're going to need good internet in your house, aren't you? All that stuff goes into this £27,000. Again, we see MPs only taking out what they need to. 136 MPs underspent the budget by £10,000 or more. That means they spent a maximum of £17,000 or less when they could have spent £27,000. Only 150 MPs spent the lot. That means 500 MPs didn't spend everything. They are not in it to rinse the taxpayer for everything they can, and you can tell that because hardly anyone, in fact nobody, spends every penny of every single bit. They need the housing, and Parliament sets it up. IPSA, again, takes the receipt and pays the rent. The MPs don't see a penny of that money. Let's go back to those Mondays when MPs are stuck in Westminster until 10:30, 11 p.m. They have to be there because they have to be able to vote. They can't go out for food. Food is provided, not for free, but at the cost of staff and the food itself. So they don't make a profit from it. It is good value. I worked at Parliament for a bit. The food was really good and it was cheap. And then people are like, wine and beer, there are bars in Parliament. Yes, there are bars in Parliament where people go after work and it's nice. And again, it's relatively cheap. It's much cheaper than the Red Lion, which is the pub right next to where Parliament is. And it's like, £15 a pint or whatever it is. And people get cross. Why the heck shouldn't an MP and MP's staff and people who work in the education service like I did be allowed a glass of wine with their meal? I just don't get that argument. Finally, we've got gifts. Gifts too. And again, people say it's all very corrupt. And it doesn't help that there is some corruption. Like there was a fella, Scott Benton MP. And I've got to be careful what I say here because it's all alleged and wasn't proved. But it's alleged that he sat in front of somebody, a gambling company, a pretend gambling company, they're actually the Guardian, that he sat in front of them and he told them how to get round the gift rules. And he said, allegedly, I've seen the video, it looks really like he said this, but allegedly he said he would argue with the minister on behalf of the gambling lobby if the gambling lobby gave him stuff. That, if it happened, that is corruption and it stinks and I hate it and he's no longer an MP. But most of them aren't corrupt. MPs have to declare anything over £300 that they receive. So they can accept a gift, but they have to say, I accepted this £500 gift from Simple Politics. So when you stand to talk in Parliament on a subject around Simple Politics, you have to declare your interest so everyone knows you've accepted a present from them or you're involved with them or something like that. And it's all above board. Accepting something, not telling people, and then going in on their behalf, that's illegal. It's illegal to do. If it's over £500, it has to be from someone on the UK electoral roll. It's got to be UK based, like a UK based company or whatever. Some MPs just don't accept anything at all. Some MPs do and declare it. Listen, I'm not a big fan of this stuff. I'm not a big fan of gifts and things. If someone is giving you something, they want something in return. You're not a charity. So it is tricky, but I also believe that most MPs aren't rinsing the system. Again, if you go back to the number of MPs who claim the maximum amount of money for their office or for staff or for their company, it's tiny. People aren't rinsing the system, and there's clear evidence they aren't. And you can tell me stories about people like Scott Benton, but they are the exception, I believe. And I think that we need to give MPs a break. So, like I say, there is evidence that they're not rinsing the system. A lot of people say they are, but they've got no evidence to back that up. They're all doing it for this reason or that reason. There is no evidence that they are. And if we're being grown-ups, then we need to take the side that is clearly proved and evidenceable, rather than just the hunch that we've got of mistrust. I know Partygate destroyed a lot of that. So that's the money that MPs get paid by Parliament. 91,000, going up to £94,000 a year. I say, yeah, they're worth it.